So I want to share I'm in Pittsburgh right now, just physically Pittsburgh, PA, and also acknowledging that, you know, physically, spatially, I'm on the land of at least several indigenous groups and tribes from all throughout time and space. I just really want to acknowledge the importance of that as well in general, and of course, including tonight. I also wanted to say if we can engage in a few moments of silence for any sentient beings affected by violence, oppression, other forms of hate and injustice, if we could just do a few moments of silence. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'd like to introduce the panelists now and another words of gratitude. And I apologize if I make any mistakes along the way. Please feel free to correct me with anything, and I apologize in advance. Definitely not my intent, but if that's the impact, please let me know. Wanted to introduce Cecilia Soto. Cecilia Soto joined the Peace Advocacy Network board, or the PAN board, in 2016. She is a graduate of the Pan Vegan Pledge and is the co-organizer for Phoenixville Veg Fest, a vegan food and street festival. She loves to cook and loves the challenge of veganizing dishes. In her free time, she enjoys reading and taking foodie road trips with her family and friends. Welcome, Cecilia. And is there anything further you'd like to share in your intro?
Thank you so much for inviting me. I was laughing as you read that because it's been a long time, so it's funny to hear what I wrote in that a few years ago. But I also wanted to add that I'm also a school board member on my local school district, and I sit on I'm in my third year there, and that's all.
That's awesome too.
That's awesome.
Thank you again. Michelle Rojas Soto has been an advocate for racial justice, women's rights, disability rights, and LGBTQ+ rights. She is currently the Social Justice Director at the Eagle Rock Neighborhood Council and the chair of the Inclusion Committee for the Superintendent's Parent Advisory Council in Glendale, USC, pioneering a comprehensive anti-bias initiative. She also serves on the Glendale Police Community Advisory Panel and on the Coalition for Anti-Racist Glendale. She was a founding member of Gender Equity and Animal Rights, also known as GEAR, from 2018 to 2020, when she launched the Amplify Career Sponsorship Program for women and gender nonconforming people. Michelle served on the board of directors for Pearls of Africa Children's Home in Gulu, Uganda, and was co-organizer for LA Tech for Good. Michelle has a master's in biology from Caltech and a master's in business administration from USC. She lives in Los Angeles, California, with her husband and 4 children. Welcome, Michelle. Is there anything further you'd like to share?
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. I'll share that I work professionally in the animal advocacy space, and I realize that the bio I gave you did not include that. I work at Encompass, which is a racial equity group specifically serving animal advocacy organizations.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle, and welcome. Can folks hear me okay? Should I speak louder? Is the volume okay? We're good. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. And welcome, Jose. Jose Mendez, San Francisco Director of Factory Farming Awareness Coalition, delivers presentations on factory farming and its impacts to schools, corporations, and organizations around the San Francisco Bay Area. Jose manages the FFAC blog, supports grant management, and coordinates volunteers. Jose has been working as the San Francisco Director for FFAC since fall 2019. Prior to this, he worked as a publishing assistant for a number of nonprofit publishers around the Bay Area. Jose holds a BA in English from UC Berkeley. For the past decade, he has been involved with many immigrant advocacy, animal advocacy, and food justice organizations, working to address the points of intersection between different causes. Welcome again, Jose. And is there anything further you'd like to share?
No, I think that pretty much sums it up. Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Great, great. You're very welcome, everyone. And then we would like to introduce Alejandra Tolle. Alejandra Tolle is one of the LA chapter organizers with Veggie Mijas, with whom Alejandra has been with for over a year. Alejandra runs a plant-based community fridge in South Central, which provides free fresh produce to the community there. Welcome, Alejandra. Anything further you'd like to share?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I should probably also add that I recently just became a writer for Veggie Mijas.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I'm in the very beginning stages of it, but it's a chapter that I'm really excited to get started on. But thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
I'm gonna finish.
You are so welcome. We're happy that you and everyone else are here too. That's really awesome. And congratulations again on the writing.
Thank you.
It's not you.
Yeah, we want to acknowledge all the great organizations part of tonight: FFAC, Encompass, Veggie Mijas, PAN, and PBS. And if I'm missing anyone, I forget. I'm forgetting. I apologize. But we welcome everyone.
I know.
So yeah, we are excited for the panels to begin. So we'll have several questions throughout tonight, and our dialogue, may proceed very naturally and flow and go organically. And so if some questions go in some different directions, overall, that's totally fine. We want to be fluid as possible. And we want to share, we imagine for everyone in this room, this is something already on people's minds, but we just want to say it to kind of lean in with curiosity and compassion and using respectful language throughout tonight. We really want to emphasize that in a gentle, compassionate way. And then kind of on an important logistic note too, we're going to ask folks, please ask questions, but if of the panelists and the discussion, but if you could reserve the questions toward the end of our time in the chat and or via audio, that would be great. And we'll have time to address those questions too. Any logistic questions before we proceed? Okay. Awesome. So our first question is for all the panelists, and certainly if someone doesn't, wish to answer some question for the panelists, totally fine. Just want to say that too. But our first question is, please describe your path to becoming vegan.
I can start, I guess.
Awesome.
I've been vegan now for 8 years. And, for me, it was actually, my path started a little differently than most people that I know. My husband actually went vegan first. He actually did the Peace Advocacy Network Vegan Pledge, and I believe it was their first year doing it too, 10 years ago. And so he did that himself, and I was not vegan at the time, but I supported him in it. And he had originally done it for health reasons. He was trying to get a little healthier, and I had given him this ad I found in the newspaper. When I have to laugh because we get most of our news on social media now, but back then it was like this little tiny blurb in the paper, and he did it. And shortly after, me and my son decided to become vegetarian. My son was always a big animal lover, and he kind of put two and two together and told me that he didn't want to eat animals anymore. And so I said, okay, I became vegetarian with him. And then about, I would say a year later, I eventually became vegan myself. So it did take about 2 years for me to do a full transition. But yeah, I've been vegan for 8 years, and it's been great. It's a great experience. I've met a lot of wonderful people in the community. So I'm very grateful for everything, and for PAN, who has become kind of an extended family to me over the years. I've met a lot of friends through there, and it's been a great experience overall. So it's been kind of nice to be part of it and see it grow over the years.
I can certainly take this question too. I became vegan 9 years this coming April. 9 years ago, this coming April. My husband and I switched overnight after watching Forks Over Knives one Sunday night, similar for health reasons. And at that time, then I borrowed a bunch of recipe books from the library to learn how to figure out cooking differently. I had to provide for 2 adults and 4 children. So food had to be tasty, it had to be recognizable. And I didn't feel confident in my ability to do that with such a fast change. But after a year, I noticed that I felt much more confident meal prep wise. And also my palate changed, which I wasn't expecting. And I remember about 6 weeks in making this switch, everything started tasting way more flavorful. So that was definitely a plus after I got over that first hump. And then about a year or two after switching to a plant-based diet, I started reading books about the ethics of animal lives and how that relates to our food choices. And my veganism took a more ethical, skew, and that ethical component became important to me, and it made all the other challenges, social and so on, way more bearable. And that's what's carried me on till today.
I can go ahead and go next. So I actually went vegetarian in 2011, and I saw this documentary called Food Incorporated. And even though it talked about health-wise what it was doing to the people in the country, I remember mainly the conditions that the animals are being put through, and that's kind of what stuck with me. And I was vegetarian for 5 years, and through those 5 years, I knew that the dairy and the meat industry were directly connected. I kind of just was ignorant and chose to think that being vegetarian was enough. But it came to the point where all of this information was in front of me, and I knew that to be like a good animal lover, I have to be vegan. So in 2016 is when I started to transition, and it wasn't until 2017, when I was already about 80% vegan, that the documentary What the Health came out. And I was watching it with my family, and I kind of just for fun betted my dad, if you go vegan for 30 days, like I'll give you a lot of money. And he did do it, but when I challenged him, me and my mom and my sister joined on. After the 30 days, he didn't stay vegan, but me and my mom and my sister did. And we've been vegan ever since, and we're gonna be 4 years vegan this May. So yeah.
Can go next as well too. When I was in high school, like a little punk kid, I watched Meet Your Meat, the 10-minute documentary that Peter put out, narrated by Alec Baldwin. And like to this day, I still remember the line, "What you are about to see is beyond your worst nightmare." That's the opening. And then watched 10 minutes later, I went vegetarian. I haven't had meat since then because it was just seeing the conditions and the treatment of animals. Obviously, I just didn't want to contribute to that. I was vegan on and off since then a couple times. I always kind of like struggled with it because of like commitment and not, having access to a lot of food, which has always been a big struggle growing up. And I came to Berkeley. I transferred from a community college down to Berkeley, where I am near now. And around the time when I was just coming over to Berkeley, my grandmother actually got cancer. She became very ill. She was the oldest of eight and had 8 kids herself. So she was very traditional, like Mexican matriarch, where she helped raise all her siblings and her kids and all her grandkids and everyone basically. And she was very young. She died, she was only in her 60s, and died of stomach cancer and suffered in the hospital for a very long time. Around Thanksgiving Day, the doctors basically told us, like, say your goodbyes because she's going to be passing soon. And unfortunately continued living on for a few more days after that, just suffering, struggling, dealing with cancer and just a lot of pain. And I watched her pretty much die, and my whole family watched her. And after that, I really wanted to figure out like what caused that, what happened to that, because she had always been like this really fiery, strong woman who'd done so much for everybody. And I looked into it and started reading all the research about the health impacts of eating animals and especially consumption, and seeing how much it impacts communities of color, especially Black and Hispanic communities, and seeing just the really high rates of heart disease, cancer, and all kinds of cancers and stuff, and looking more into that, and then realizing that I didn't want my family to go through that again. I didn't want to go through that. And so that's where I really officially kind of made the switch over to like whole foods, plant-based, which eating more vegan foods. On the same time, I also started getting involved with a lot of the food justice organizations in the Bay Area, like Food Not Bombs and East Bay Food Justice Project. and started to learn a lot more also about like how disproportionately this affects our communities and how much of an impact it makes, and really learning more about that and wanting to deal with those issues.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for sharing those really meaningful experiences. Certainly many pathways to becoming vegan and staying vegan. We really appreciate all of that and all of the different cultural and familial layers as well. And Jose, my condolences for the loss that you shared. Thank you, everyone. We'll go on to the next question. Okay. Did everyone get to share? Okay.
Before I go on, Jose, I must say I relate in a couple of different ways, because Meet Your Meat is what started my path into veganism as well. Very powerful film. So my question is, what challenges have you had to overcome and how on your vegan path?
I can start that. Extended family gatherings bring up a lot of mixed feelings for me, and still to this day, because I'm not able to fully share in the social aspects of food. So there's definitely a component of sadness, especially, and I noticed that especially after my veganism took on a more ethical role to it. That does continue to be in flux because there's more and more vegan foods at the family table, the extended family table. Thanks in large part to there being so many more familiar substitutes of things that even the folks who eat meat recognize and enjoy, and the increased accessibility that they're in more supermarkets that folks can, my dad will find something in the supermarket, and even if he's not vegan, but he'll recognize it, he'll pick it up and he'll bring it to the family barbecue. So there's definitely an improvement there, but we still have some ways to go. And I think that's the challenge that touches me the most personally.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that. That's something I think that's a lot of, I think vegans can relate with. I know for us, we also have big family gatherings, and at first I think people had a hard time understanding. But I remember like taking my son, it was Thanksgiving, and he was about 7 or 8 years old now. He's a lot older now, but we went to Thanksgiving and there was like a turkey on the table, and he came to me crying. I didn't know what happened. And he was really upset about seeing a turkey on the table. And I think, he started to relate more of the compassion for it. And I promised him that we were not going to go to Thanksgiving where there's a turkey on the table after that, and I kept my promise. I started hosting gatherings for Thanksgiving, which my family weren't too happy at first. But I would say, look, you have me for Christmas and New Year's, right? So I would do that, and that's something that that I think has helped. I now host every year. I host, not obviously last year because of the pandemic, but I normally host what I call is an open Thanksgiving, because I feel like the holidays are kind of tough, especially because it's a lot of the holidays are based around food. So I always invite people who may not have a place to go, whether they're not vegan or not, to come to my home, and we have a Thanksgiving here. But for family gatherings, we've always just brought sides and things that people can relate to, so that they don't. And I don't always tell people it's vegan. I just put it on the table. People will eat it, not realizing that you can eat rice and beans and it be vegan. But I think it was a lot harder when my son was younger, because he was trying to fit in more. But it has gotten easier over the years, and I think my family's more accepting. I mean, every once in a while you get a comment here and there, but they've become more accepting over the years. And I just think it's just unfamiliar. I think that's what it is, kind of, and trying to make it, normalize it more, I guess. And I do feel like it's becoming more normalized, and it makes things a lot easier.
I think in my experience, I think I'm lucky enough to have, like how I said earlier, I have 2 other family members in my immediate house that are vegan. So the support has always been there. And I feel like our family, we're very close to to just, you know, the immediate uncles around us. So they're usually fine with it. But I think with me, it was more of a challenge socially when I started going to like vegan activist events or vegan demonstrations. And I found that it was hard to find other vegans who kind of understood the cultural ties to food and why it took a while to go vegan. And I kind of made the assumption that vegans with a single issue lens on advocacy and not really seeing more than one way can relate to me. And I guess I made that mistake. So when I did find a community of different BIPOC vegans where we can talk about the different injustices, I felt way more comfortable as a vegan. So that was definitely something that I overcame by just finding a community of vegans that I felt more comfortable with.
I had similar stuff with the like the cultural aspect of it. I think obviously every culture has connection to food and there's specific kinds of food that they eat. For mine, or like Mexican culture, very heavily on like shredded meats, carnitas, carne asada, that kind of stuff. And so when I would have like family get-togethers or something like that, and be like, "Well, I'm not eating that. That's a huge portion of what we're eating." Getting into questioning about that and asking that. When my family sort of, it took a very long time for them to understand and accept a lot of this stuff. That like I would go someplace and not eat food that they would work a lot hard on, which very hard on, which is very hard, obviously. Having my grandmother pass away did sort of, they kind of understood that though. They were like, because they started telling them more and trying to educate them about like the impacts of the food we were eating and the impacts on the animals and the environment, that kind of stuff. And then learning to cook was super useful. Like it's really good to be able to just replicate a lot of the stuff. Somebody mentioned that. And just like doing replacements or just like being, it's very, because obviously like the culture I'm from has a very traditional sort of gender roles and stuff. And so I was not really expected to cook or anything like that. So once I learned how to do that, I kind of changed their minds a little bit in a lot of ways. And also just like kind of being empathetic is very hard as well too. I think a lot of the times, especially with culture and family and friends and stuff, of just being like, I know this, I am aware of these issues, I learned about them and I've changed, why can't you? And really understanding that like that's not a good approach from a pragmatic sense, but also just from an ethical sense and from a compassionate sense. Like it doesn't help people to attack anybody or anything like that, and trying to work on ways that you can kind of take the sort of outrage that you feel about these issues and about the treatment of animals, but also utilizing it and being compassionate and being able to talk to people, especially close friends and family and stuff.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I sense a common theme that, you know, one of the hardest parts is being around loved ones and family and trying to navigate, you know, being true to one's values and veganism and trying to eat and prepare food around people that are not vegan. And that can definitely be a challenge. Thank you. I believe Tammy has our next question.
Yeah, and it's a great follow-up because just I think a lot of us here are already vegan and we totally relate to everything that you folks are saying, and we're like, yes, I felt the same way. And that being said, there are a lot of new vegans here and new vegans in the world, right? It's awesome. But what what guidance do you have based on your experiences with overcoming these challenges for those new vegans who may face similar barriers? What can you maybe say to them to help them overcome those initial challenges?
I mean, one of the things that for me, I think that helped was that, if I was going to an event that revolved around food, at first I would make sure I would eat beforehand. That's what I used to do. Nowadays, I will bring something. But, I try to figure out, more or less like what the food situation is going to be when, because I don't want food to always be the topic. I want it to be about spending time with folks and and if they're interested in talking about it, I'll talk about it with them. But I definitely think that that it's helpful like to come prepared for whatever situation you're going to be in. I think that's just a tip I always give people, and I think that's helpful.
Learn to cook. I think that's always my best tip, is just like learn to cook like good stuff. You don't have to learn to cook a boatload of stuff. Just learn to cook like a main dish, a side, a dessert, and just like perfect it, and then you can win over a lot of people that way. I think that's pretty much what I've done. It's just like having big elaborate potlucks with stuff and having all the stuff vegan, and then just that helps win people over. I mean, like there's a ton of like resources on like effective communication, advocacy, how to have conversations with people. But at the end of the day, for me, the most effective thing I've ever done was just like making people like some fancy food and then just winning them over that way. I'm thinking like, oh, this isn't that weird. This is delicious. I could try this, that kind of stuff.
I would
Yeah.
say,
Oh,
go
sorry.
for it.
No, you can go ahead.
I would say, like Jose, learn to cook something that's a comfort food, something that you love, whether it be chocolate chip cookies or, whatever that is for you, so that it doesn't feel like you're punishing yourself by going vegan. And then also take advantage of all the, meetup.com vegan groups and whatnot, and get to talk to some other people local to you who are also eating plant-based, so that you can have that social component to it, and learn from each other and figure out what restaurants have what and so on, so that it's more fun and more enjoyable as you go.
Yeah, I think the best tip that I've learned is to really invest in spices and oils and vinegars and different cooking essentials as opposed to vegan specialty items. I feel like that way it's a lot more affordable in the long run, and you just won't get bored. Also, another tip is that how few of us have said we've all taken our time going vegan is don't expect to be vegan right away. There's going to be a lot of mistakes. Everyone is an imperfect vegan some way or another. So don't feel like you have to get it right away. Kind of just pace yourself. So like everyone said, it is more enjoyable for you as well.
I particularly love how like easy these suggestions are, right? Learn to cook, be full before you go somewhere. And I agree with all of them, but I feel like it's also stuff that we forget. Like when I first went vegan, I was the same way. I was like, what am I gonna do? Like I don't know what to do. But they're actually like really easy solutions,
Yeah, and there's also a lot of great like apps out there. Like I remember Happy Cow was a big one for me. So when I would go places, I can see what food was in the area, especially when I traveled. So that's good. And yeah, and learning to cook your favorite foods. I agree with Michelle. You definitely shouldn't, just because you're now plant-based doesn't mean that you can't enjoy some of your favorite foods. There are different ways to make things, and it's a great way to experiment and learn to cook some of your favorite things.
Thanks everyone for your wonderful answers, and I love to hear everyone's experiences. So our next question is, how does your cultural identity inform your vegan identity?
I can go if anyone else wants to share. I think for me, it's always been, they're very closely tied together. I think that veganism is very traditionally thought of as like a sort of white movement, or at least it has that association. And it's sort of unfortunate. There's obviously a lot of issues with colonialism and how meat industry and cattle was brought over to the Americas, and sort of food was used as a sort of as a tool of diet and food were used as tools of colonialism, and how a lot of the culture that we have now that we think of as being very focused on meat is actually not accurate. It's also just a part of colonialism, and how there's more traditional, like indigenous people and Native American people still consumed animal products, obviously, but nowhere near to the extent that we do now, and focus more on things like the Tres Hermanas, Three Sisters, sort of like corn, maize, and squash, and that kind of those more obviously non-animal products. So for me, that's always in the back of my head when I talk about like a lot of this stuff. The work that I do now is when I go to give presentations about factory farming, animal agriculture, especially when I talk to here in Oakland, sort of East Oakland, where it's very traditionally Hispanic, and then West Oakland, where it's Black communities and stuff, and also making a point to integrate those kinds of aspects into it, the intersectionality of talking about these different issues, and not just saying that it's I obviously want to center the animals and to focus a lot on the animal impacts, but there is a lot of issues well associated with the industry in terms of the environment, in terms of worker rights, treatment of workers, and exploitation of workers on factory farms, slaughterhouses, and also incorporating all these other elements and making sure to touch upon it. That's one thing that FFAC we do a lot, is we really try to focus on like intersectionality and how it impacts all these different issues. It's obviously very hard to talk about every single thing, but making a point to show that these are not like separate issues that don't affect people of color, or communities of color, marginalized communities. Like it affects us in all these ways, and elaborating on them and trying to educate people about that.
One thing I want to add too is that when, for me, when I thought of veganism before, and I think you a lot of people, like it's hard to not have that stereotype, right? That oh, are they like hippies or whatever the case is, and it's something that I think over time, I've recognized that veganism can be a part of whatever you are. And for me, my Latino culture is a big part of me. So, I bring a lot of that influence into my veganism. I don't think, you shouldn't forget what your identity is or try to be something that you're not, and try to embrace your culture in it. So I think that's very important. Some people, think it's expensive to be vegan. You have to shop at Whole Foods, you have to shop at Trader Joe's, but that's not true at all. Like I still love going to my, international supermarket that I have here to get some of my favorite, Caribbean, vegetables, my root vegetables, and make things with them. So, it's very important to not to forget, where you're from and what your culture embraces in your vegan identity. I think it's important. And I also think it's important to recognize that, these communities, may not understand, when it comes to these things like, what is tofu, may not be a big thing in Latin cooking, but, in other cultures, it's part of their diet. Like in Asian cultures, they, you see tofu in their diet, or, and now, nowadays, a lot of that stuff is being incorporated amongst the cultures. And I think it's great. I think it's, it's wonderful. I think we can all continue to learn from each other through it all. And it's a great thing to see.
Yeah, oh wait, sorry. I think I really love what you said, is that when you do talk about veganism in a more intersectional way, there is more than one way to be an ethical vegan. It doesn't just have to be about animal rights. Even though animals, yes, are at the forefront, there are so many different isms like environmentalism, feminism, racism, that really lodges into the same root of what veganism is about. It's a philosophy, ethical idea. And I think for me, it was to a point where when I did go to family get-togethers, we did have to bring our own separate food. But now, I do bring Mexican foods that do have substitutes like jackfruit for carnitas or soy chorizo for tacos de papa. And I am able to show my family that we are able to veganize our traditional dishes. It's not that hard to do. And I feel like in that way, I still am very close to my Latin culture, even when I am with loved ones. So that's how I cope with it for sure.
Yeah, similar to what Jose mentioned, I'm Puerto Rican. I consider myself Black, Latinx, and because my people are marginalized in this country, social justice advocacy has been I made it a very important part of my life early on, much earlier on than my veganism. So my vegan identity is centered on advocacy, and that in and of itself is centered in my cultural identity. So I'm an animal vegan advocate because of my commitment to social justice, not the other way around. And being a Black Latina person, being an immigrant, gives me a lot of strength and courage that seeps into what I do professionally. It seeps into my veganism. It seeps into my interest in trying new foods, that trying new recipes from every culture. Living in Los Angeles, I had already been exposed to so many different cuisines, which is a wonderful blessing. And that sort of anything goes spirit, and the spirit of making do with what you have, like last week, I remember going into the pantry. It's like, oh gosh, well, there's a bag of lentils and I have salsa. I think I could do something with that. And just, if I do it with enthusiasm, I can convince everybody that that's dinner. So it's just that, that going along and making something out of nothing is very much a part of what my parents, my grandparents, my aunts and uncles taught me, and I use it every day.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for the really moving responses. I really appreciate the themes of resourcefulness and flexibility and certainly intersectionality for sure. So thank you, everyone. And I definitely can connect around kind of, trying to make do with what we have, at least in the moment. And I really appreciate as well that there's different dimensions of ethical veganism. I really appreciate that that was named very directly, and specifically. So thank you, everyone. Our next question is, have there been any biases you have faced based on your Latinx identity? And if so, how have you coped with this?
I think with me, I feel like the bias for me comes from my extended family, and I feel like I got it a lot more 10 years ago when I did go vegetarian. I think the memory that I have that I think about a lot still is when we had a get together, and I think it was one of the first get-togethers I had when I was vegetarian, and I wasn't eating anything what my family had cooked. And my aunt pulled me aside, and then she really just tried pushing her religious beliefs on me and using her beliefs to justify why I should be eating meat. So I think that has really stuck with me, but I coped with it by I just had to not let it affect me, and I had to stick to the reason why I went vegan. And it was for the animals and for ethics. So I feel like I really just had to, even if it was in a way blocking a family member, I knew that their intentions were good, but I feel like I had to stay true to myself and I couldn't forget why I went vegan. So that was mainly the biggest bias that I had to deal with.
I think for me, being a mom and my son, who's, at the time he was 7 or 8, he was young, and he was a small kid, for his age. And so I would get comments too, he's not eating enough, he needs to have more milk, things like that. But, I was thankful that my son was very outspoken, so he didn't mind defending himself. But as a parent, you want to protect your kids. You don't want them to be hurt. But it's something that I think that over time gets easier. Family is tough. Friends are also tough. I'll be honest, I have friends that no longer talk to us. And I noticed it. I would go to gatherings and like they would say, "No, we'll cook for you. We'll cook for you," and I'd be hesitant. And then I'd go and it's like a veggie platter, and I just thought like it's really like disrespectful. So over time, I just realized that that was not true friendship. You start to see, who are your true friends and who really care. And my family over time has, they seem to have gotten it, at least understanding more. I've got a couple family members that are vegetarian. I've got my one vegan cousin, who, always is excited when she sees me because she's like, "Oh, you're gonna bring wonderful vegan food." So that's kind of nice. And one of my siblings is vegetarian, so the little influences, and even my mom, who had gotten sick and had gone to the doctor, and he told her, "Well, I think you should go on a plant-based diet," and she kind of laughed and she said, "You'll never believe what the doctor said to me, my cardiologist." So I was like, "Well, mom, he ain't wrong." So I do think that trying to people sometimes, like Alejandra said, they mean well, so you try not to take it personal. but you know, and try to be a little bit, you know, just my always thing is just smile and nod. Okay, yeah, smile and nod, you know. But it can be challenging at times and can be hurtful, but it does get easier, I think, you know, you develop that thicker skin.
Well, for me, I've worked in the animal protection movement for 4 years now, since 2017. But I worked professionally for many, many years before that in other fields. And I've noticed that folks doubt my professional abilities because of my Latinx identity. That happened, that's happened the entire time that I've lived in this country, working in other spaces and working in animal protection as well. And like Jose mentioned earlier, there's some, you know, there's some assumptions we make about animal advocacy being a place that's centered in justice, but that's not always the case. So I'm not surprised of these, you know, I'm disappointed, I will say, but I do deal with it. I cope with it because I am very confident in my abilities and I have an excellent track record of performance. And I also surround myself with lots of wonderful, loving people, you know, family, friends, and even colleagues. You know, I try to choose my colleagues, and having that mutual support and encouragement are very, very important to go the distance, especially working professionally in an environment that can be racially charged and where there's so much emotional labor to my day.
I've been pretty lucky in so far as like when I became involved in animal advocacy, animal rights, and joined the community and vegan community in general. I never really felt sort of any kind of bias or anything because of my cultural identity, because being Latino, Mexican. I Some of the like the first vegans I met when I moved to the Bay Area were other people of color, mostly other Mexicans and stuff. So I was already kind of, it wasn't like I was one in a crowd or something like that. There was already like a very diverse crowd. Partly, I think that is because like where I am, the Bay Area is incredibly diverse, and so there's a lot of different groups and communities and people all over. So I never really faced any of like that issues myself. I'm sure my gender also probably has something to do with that as well. But I never had to like, I felt very accepted. I think that for me that was part of it, was like that I never, my race and ethnicity and stuff was never an issue with a lot of these communities as it was with some other groups or some other like movements I've been a part of in other aspects. Just because I think a lot of the communities, a lot of the groups that I was a part of or joined were already very diverse and had already done a lot of the work in terms of dealing with some of these issues. It's not to say that they were perfect or that they are perfect or that there is not obviously a significant need for addressing a lot of the different biases and just a lot of the different aspects, obviously. But I've been very lucky that my experience that the organizations I've worked with, been a part of, have always been like very accepting and very understanding and very accommodating for like a lot of these different aspects.
Thank you again, everyone, so much for sharing the range of experiences, including how folks have navigated and coped. As I ask the next question, I just want to have a preface to it. So the next question is, what can vegan communities do to be more inclusive culturally? And my sort of preface, so to speak, also is, you know, we are not intending to say that the responsibility for this is on BIPOC communities by any means. Asking for it in an exploratory way, any kind of, based on your experiences, any thoughts, any recommendations, just put it out there.
I can start. On the face of it, going from the eating habits angle, I think we should stop prescribing best and better ways to be vegan, because more often than not, there's a racial bias to those qualifications of best and better. There's a cultural bias to them. And I've had folks tell me that their diet is much better, and on the surface, it is not an individual judgment. It is centered on white supremacy culture. And then on the animal advocacy side, I think it's just as important that we don't use colonizing strategies in advocacy. Where in the advocacy world, we are striving to build a global advocacy movement that is transformative and that has lasting power. And in order to do that, we really need to create advocacy strategies and campaigns that are centered locally, that are created locally, and that are culturally relevant. And from there, expand instead of exporting campaigns created in the United States, exporting them to Mexico or to Brazil. Let's give folks an opportunity to create campaigns that speak to them specifically. The work I do at Encompass is specifically focused on helping white-led organizations learn how to contribute and lead equity initiatives that benefit staff and volunteers and the public that they're trying to persuade. So there's definitely work to be done at all layers of veganism and all layers of advocacy in order to improve the current state of affairs.
I just want to echo some of the points that Michelle made. I think that's a good point, is to, you have this, vegan, ideal of what veganism is, but it really should work from the reverse up. If you go, one of the great programs that I used to attend here when I first was becoming vegan was a local doctor who was, she was Puerto Rican. So she would have these things in Spanish, these programs in Spanish, where she would teach how to make plant-based meals, and did everything in Spanish, and for me, it was great because, the people that went weren't vegan, but she would teach them how to make some of their, favorite meals in a vegan way with regular ingredients, like just using simple ingredients, things that you can find, because, not everyone's going to be able to buy, Beyond Meat or name brand Impossible sausages, or things that can be costly for a family on a fixed income sometimes as well. So it was great to go, and for her, it was also, she'd teach like not to, with the no oil and things like that, and how to, incorporate other things. So I like that idea of trying to start from the bottom up within the communities. And sometimes when I talk about veganism, if you go straight to talking about the animal rights, it can be a turnoff for some people, because some people don't want to hear it. They really don't. They don't want to be faced with a culture that, these animals are being treated cruel. So you have to come from different angles. So I think being able to relate more and try to, and also learn from others and their cultures is helpful, I think.
Yeah, and I also think it's really important to, when vegan outreach is in BIPOC communities, when, different vegan organizations go into those communities and right away talk about animal liberation. I think instead of coming out with the aggressive approach of them having a moral issue, I think they really need to step back and recognize that it's more a systemic issue and a capitalistic issue of why they can't go vegan. They need to also step back and recognize the obstacles that are in front of them when it comes to the environmental racism that's in front of them, the scarce accessibility of fresh foods that they have in front of them, and realize that every single injustice does intersect. And for the most case, it's out of the control of a lot of these communities. So I think that's really important, to just listen to BIPOC vegans when we say, this is true, this is how the movement is going to go forward, is if you really take these different notes in mind. So that's what I would say.
I think that's sort of like the very important part of it is not going into communities and telling them what to do or how to change them, or telling them that they're wrong to do their cultural practices or anything like that, but really listening to them both as internally, like adopting and hiring more diverse staff and having more voices among those different organizations, but then also going to communities and actually asking them what they think and what they need, rather than just mandating things at them or telling them that what they're doing is wrong and they need to change everything, right? Because that is not very helpful. There's a lot of problematic aspects with that. I think for more sort of in terms of the actual animal advocacy organizations and communities, I obviously can only speak for the few organizations that I've worked with, but in my prior work, I also did a lot of work on diversity, equity, and inclusion, working with a few local organizations, including one major nearby institution. And a lot of it was just like really bad lip service of talking about like diversity and equity, talking about like we are pledged to be more diverse, we pledge to do all these things, or like we stand with so and so movement and things like that, and just making a lot of like platitudes and statements about these things, but never actually addressing any of the fundamental systemic aspects of it in terms of their hiring, in terms of compensation, in terms of listening to different people, of highlighting different aspects of that, or at least only tokenizing them basically. And that is a huge problem as well too. It may be well-intentioned or it may not be well-intentioned, but it doesn't address a lot of those root issues, doesn't address those larger systemic issues. And so I think that's super important as well to deal with among the animal rights, animal advocacy community, vegan communities, is to not just say like, hey, we value diversity, respect, we want to be inclusive and stuff, but actually taking viable steps to make those changes to address those issues. Because it's one thing to say that we are just, we care about our diverse people and then completely ignore them or completely keep marginalizing them or contributing to their marginalization. And that's obviously a lot of other steps that need to be done, a lot of things that need to be addressed, but like making actual concrete steps to address these things rather than just doing lip service or just not really making any actual changes.
Thank you everyone so much for these really significantly helpful experiences and input and recommendations. It's super, super appreciated. And it's continues to be, of course, a dialogue for sure. So thank you. I think Tammy, one of your questions might be up next.
It is, thank you.
Sure.
So my question is, it's a little bit broad, so you can, play with it as you like, but what does being a vegan advocate and activist mean to you?
For me, it's mostly empathy. That's kind of the angle I come from with it. I before I decided to run for office, I would attend these parent meetings because I had concerns about some of the things at school. And, for those kind of things, I didn't necessarily approach it as a vegan advocate. It was more of a wellness advocate. I started going to talk about the foods at the school. I wanted our kids to eat healthier foods. I joined their parent advisory panel for their cafeteria food and worked on that from that angle. One of the things that I think is important is that, a lot of kids who get free and reduced lunches, that live in the poverty level don't always have that experience in these schools. They offer a lot of, pizza and chicken fingers and unhealthy foods that, even as an adult, you wouldn't eat every day, vegan or not. So that was one of the aspects that, that I went through in trying to get them to start preparing more fresh foods and bringing that and teaching these young kids what these fruits and vegetables were. I mean, I didn't know what kale was till I became a vegan, and that's kind of shameful, honestly, but I wasn't exposed to these kind of things. So, for me, it's more from that level of, of caring, compassion, and education, which is a big part of the things that I work on, and educating our young children and our future generations. So I think it's important to bring that into my advocacy. And that's something I tend to focus on from that angle. So, I mean, I guess, I don't know if that necessarily answers the question, but it's just, for me, it's more about empathy and compassion. And
it totally does, because I think it's a very personal question for a reason, right? We want to hear about your experience. So I think it absolutely answers the question.
Yeah. And we've come from other angles, the environment and, sustainability and all those kind of things. So there's more to it. but I'm happy, and our school offers non-dairy milks, and well, I mean, they did when they were open full time, but non-dairy milks, and even and foods and things that kids can eat and learn, and they even do like try vegetable weeks, which is kind of nice. So yeah, I'm very proud of that. So I like to always share that for people to with who may have kids in public school like I do.
I feel very similar to Iseli. In my, this is a question I ask myself all the time, and I think that the answer for me continues to shift. But one thing that is consistent is that I feel very strongly that in the times that we live in, we're in the third decade of the 21st century, no issues are experienced in isolation. And I think we've gotten as far as we were going to get solving poverty and solving racial injustice and gender injustice and so on and so forth, thinking of those things as unrelated or approaching them as siloed issues. So one thing that veganism and my vegan advocacy has contributed to is expanding my view of the integration of issues, that they're all just manifestations, different legs of the beast, and that for us to truly make the next level of impact is going to come from integrated solutions as well. So working in the movement has always, for me, had a component of social justice connected to the animal advocacy. And to me, it is absolutely essential that I mention both in the same sentence, so to speak, because just speaking about animal rights feels disingenuous. It's completely connected to all the other thoughts in our head. And so I'm not quite sure where my advocacy is going to take me 10 or 15 years from now, but I do feel very strongly that integration and reaching to other movements to gain strength is going to be essential for us to make any kind of progress.
Yeah, I think for me, going vegan and what being a vegan activist is about is that we have the capacity to keep learning and keep growing, no matter what angle you see veganism in. I feel like it's okay to keep evolving ethically and morally. I feel like it's a very significant thing to do. And I think for me, it's been such a fun and special experiences because I do get to do it with my mom and my sister. I feel like more than ever, I feel like we cook a lot more. We go to a bunch of vegan events, pre-COVID. So it's definitely a community that I really do love when you do find the right community and a community that shares your experiences and your stories. But yeah, I think bettering yourself is really contagious to the people around you. And I think it's a really special community to be in.
I think for me, a lot of it also has to do with, in part, like there's a lot of different aspects of it. There's like the animal advocacy part, which to me is very closely related to the social justice, talking about those issues. So like being an animal advocate does not just mean only advocating for animals, but it also means advocating for all the people that are impacted by the system to a larger scope. As Michelle mentioned a little bit, and how these things are not siloed, they're very interconnected. It's possible, and we should address all these issues all at once. And it's a lot of work and it's very overwhelming, but at the same time, it needs to be done, addressing stuff. And a lot of the work that I do now is mostly focused on education. Like a lot of we kind of advocate, do a lot of advocacy work, institutional campaigns, and that kind of stuff, and which I think is very important to me. I think it is a very fundamental and important part of the movement in order to actually bring about any significant change. Obviously, we need to address the larger systemic institutional issues. But in order to do that, I think one of the key things something mentioned before is education. Like I think that's there at the heart of a lot of the work is it's very hard to make any changes and to really make any significant progress in these movements without people, larger audiences, the public at large, knowing more about these issues and why they need to change. And obviously, there's been for decades now a lot of big dissemination, disinformation campaign by animal agriculture, factory farming industry, that hides a lot of these issues from people. So people aren't aware of some of the problems. They aren't aware of the environmental impact. They aren't, most of the times, like when I give a presentation, I always ask the question, like, what do you think of when you think of McDonald's farm, when you think of an animal farm? And pretty much like 9 out of 10, 9.5 out of 10 students that I talk to has no idea what a factory farm is, what modern day animal agriculture looks like, the treatment, the conditions these animals are in. It's very rare that I actually get someone who knows what a factory farm looks like, what a CAFA looks like. And that is a huge problem, obviously, and that's obviously done by design. Like, kids are not educated on these issues. They don't know, nobody knows about this. I've talked to adults, very well educated people. I've talked to like a room full of lawyers who are like all college graduates, have their, you know, degrees and stuff, and none of them could tell me what a CAFO was. None of them knew what an animal agriculture operation looks like, modern day looks like. They all still thought the idea of like old McDonald's farm and that kind of stuff. And so educating people on these issues, just making people aware of that, is like a huge component of this, of being an advocate. And also like learning more about these issues myself, like constantly learning about the connection between these aspects, and constantly learning more, and so that I can talk better about these issues, so I can have better pedagogical approaches, more persuasive arguments, and so that I'm educated for my own well-being and stuff, but also for as an advocate. I think it's hugely important.
Thank you, everyone, for your wonderful answers and insights. I'd love to hear about what's going on and what people know and don't know. And we clearly have a lot of work ahead of us. So there's another question that is something dear to my heart, which is food. So we want to ask, what are some favorite Latinx heritage vegan meals?
I mean, my favorite, I love veganizing my Latin meals very much. And one of my favorite things one of the first things I learned to veganize was sancocho, which is a Caribbean root stew. And I love to make that. You eat it around, usually whenever if you have family coming over, it's a big deal. You make this big sancocho. So I've been able to veganize that. I love that. Empanadas are a favorite of mine too. So, and I remember when I first went vegan, I called my mom and I was like, how do you make like your bistec with tostones, right? Your steak with the fried green plantains. And she was all confused. She's like, I thought you didn't eat meat. And I'm like, no, I don't, but I want to learn how you make it. And I remember going and getting these, little beefless sardine things and cooking it with, the fried plantains and everything and the garlic. And I sat down and ate it and I was like, yeah, I could do this. I could totally do this, and that was kind of like my, I can veganize anything, so I still love some of my favorite, Latin foods, and there's, no reason why you can't find ways to make them and still make them just as good.
I think for me, the one that I'm still thinking about is the thinga that we made for Christmas. I feel like we were able to perfect the recipe. And like how I said before, it used to be where we would always make our food separate. Me, my mom, and my sister will make our own food, and then my dad will like make the food for the other people. But I feel like this dish was something that everyone really enjoyed. So it was really special to eat it, but I think the recipe is something that I'm going to look forward to making next year, because we perfected it like perfect. So I really like that one.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Christmas too. This past December, my mom and dad made vegan pasteles that were just absolutely glorious. They were perfection. My mom's cooking is wonderful always, and she makes a great arroz con gandules. My dad makes great tostones. I made a vegan tembleque, which is a coconut dessert, and everybody loved it. My mother-in-law, my kids devoured it. I'm like, okay, that's definitely a winner. I can do this again. And it wasn't that much work. It actually, it's like a coconut flan, and with the veganized version cooked faster than the traditional one. And I think it was less error prone in the consistency of it. So I'm definitely going to be making that one again.
I go really hard on burritos still. I love them so much. They're just very simple to make. And here in the Bay Area, there are a ton of like burrito spots that are like little hole in the wall stuff, but they've really adapted, and because they know their audience now, especially here in the Bay Area, there's a huge vegan community. So that they've started to make a lot of like different vegan meats, different kind of like products and stuff like that. So you can get pretty much any kind of like vegan, any kind of like traditional meat and veganized, which is great, like carne asada. I had like al pastor ones, where it was amazing. It's all vegan. So that's like the common like stuff that I would eat on a regular basis. In fact, I think that's what I'm having for dinner tonight. But I recently did like a social distance visit to my mom, who is very much traditional Mexican mom, and left with a plastic bag full of about 40 tamales. They were all vegan, all like veggie bean tamales. And that's always awesome because my grandmother was the one who initially made them. Like for the family, she would like wake up at like 4 a.m. Usually around Christmas, and make like 800 of them for all the family members and stuff. And people would come by. And then my mom always would help her out, my sister as well too. And so it was nice to like leave with like basically like a hilariously large bag of tamales. So that was a great way of celebrating.
I just want to add, I love to hear stories like that because I think it means a lot when a family member goes and tries to make something for you because it's not something in their comfort zone. And I think, we appreciate it a lot more. So that's an amazing story to hear.
I totally agree. Thank you, everyone, for sharing those great foods and experiences with this. That is truly awesome. And thank you, everyone, in general, for responding to all the questions and having a really heartfelt and meaningful dialogue tonight. We really, really appreciate that. Wanted to say that we do have some time if there's any other questions coming up for folks. If folks wanted to use the chat or speak out loud, whatever's best. And if there's anything further panelists want to share, please also feel free to do so.
Someone's asking if any of us are in the Philadelphia
Yeah,
area.
I just saw that. Yeah, thank you.
I'm in Phoenixville, obviously, because I've done Phoenixville Veg Fest. And I just want to mention that real quick because I made that festival a very small, thinking it was going to be a very small festival my first year. I live in a small town with about 18,000 people. So even though I'm in the suburbs of Philly, I'm still like 45 minutes away. So it's nice to see, we did about 5 years, I would say, straight until last year. But the year before in 2019 was our last one, obviously because of 2020. But we had 8,000 people attend our last one. So it just goes to show you, how amazing, the movement can be, and people travel from all over for food. I always say, just because I'm vegan doesn't mean I don't like to eat. I love to eat good food. I love to indulge. So I just think, it's awesome. It's awesome to see, and awesome to see people interested in asking things about, veganism. And I love educating people on it. I think it's important. And I also want to say, I really admire a lot of the folks here, and hearing you all talk about your advocacy. I always think that I don't do enough, but I mean, I know I do a lot with the schools and stuff like that, but I feel like I could always do more for the movement. But I do have my ways of sneaking in veganism into our schools, just because I think it's important. I really do. I think the compassion for it is definitely important, and health wise, animal wise, it's good, and it just gives me a lot of hope for our future. So thank you all, and thanks for having me.
That is great. Wow. And it's great to hear about experiences that folks are sharing in the chat as well across the nation. And congratulations on the Veg Fest. Wow, all those years in a row. That is really impressive and great. Hopefully Veg Fest can continue in some way in the midst of the post-pandemic. But yeah, that's wonderful. I have a question on my mind connected to what we're all talking about today. So I really appreciate how folks have shared regarding social justice, especially. It needs to be action oriented in some way, right? It can't just be in words. Of course, words matter, but it can't just end there. And one thing that grappling with as an organization with PBS, Pittsburgh Vegan Society, is regarding our mission related to food insecurity and food justice, and how to engage in social justice. Given our identities, Ellie, Chris, and myself, we identify as white, and so we want to. We want to engage in social justice and food justice, and we want to do so in ways that are authentic and that are not, going into communities and saying like, okay, this is it. We don't want to do anything like that. We want to be collaborative. And so if folks have any thoughts regarding that, particularly food justice, that I'm interested in that too.
So we started doing that with FFAC as well. Our current executive director, already had a lot of connections with some of the food justice organizations, and I worked with a lot of the food justice organizations. And I think the big thing is that there's already a lot of organizations who are filling that role or doing a lot of that work already. And reaching out to them and offering like a partnership or a collaboration, not anything where you're dictating to them what you want to do, but asking them specifically, like, what do you need? Is there anything that we can help you with? Is there here's like the resources that we might have, and then providing them for them. So to give an example, this year, obviously COVID hit hard, and there was a lot of families here in the Bay Area, especially students who were very dependent on the school lunch programs, obviously for food, or needed food access, or lost a lot of food access because of the COVID shutdowns. And so one thing we started doing was actually helping distribute a lot of food to different, like, just families and stuff, to people who might need it. But that was mostly done by like some of the volunteers, organizations, and our interns or student advocates, kind of volunteering with them and realizing like this organization that is already doing this work to provide food lunches needs volunteers to help them distribute the food or package the food. And we have that base, we have the student advocates that we can help them provide that to help meet that sort of labor need. And that helps them, that benefits them. We are not going to them and telling them what we can do for them, but rather that we are asking them, what can we do for you? And I think that's the key thing of a collaboration, is like deferring to people who are more hands-on, already have the experience doing that work.
We do something similar in our school district as well. We actually started doing pantries in all our schools in the last month or two, for families to be able to get food if they need it. A lot of the things things that a lot of kids have is the kind of embarrassment. I mean, I'm someone who grew up in poverty, and I never wanted anyone to know that I was living in poverty. So it's the food, the shame of of not of saying that that you're in that situation, and it's very sad. And honestly, I look back at my younger self and I feel sad that I felt that way. But yeah, I think food insecurity is something that we need to continue to strive on as well, and work with too.
Sean, I'll add that there's definitely work that groups can do internally to promote equity at the institutional level. And if work has not begun, I recommend starting with an assessment of sorts, like a racial equity audit, to hear from your stakeholders about their experiences engaging with the organization and ways in which it has control to make change. But similar to Jose's point, there's also work that can be done collaboratively with other organizations to have an impact in the community. And ultimately, when we think of creating an equitable society, there are so many variables at play. There's us as nonprofits, there's government, there's private, for-profit entities, there's individual contributors, etc. And needless to say, we don't have control over all of that. We have influence, and our influence gets more and more diluted the further out we go from our area of strength. So in order to sort of capitalize on complementary strengths, reach out to other groups and find out what they might be doing that you can both learn from them. What can you incorporate right away because you see that they're one step ahead of you, but also how can you collaborate in a public facing program or project that instead of now having one location, it's more distributed because you have complementary areas and so forth. So there's lots of room for folks to get creative and to try things. And I feel very strongly because of the hat I wear at Encompass, that we definitely don't have the luxury of waiting until we have perfect solutions. We must move forward with good enough and continue to improve on that as we go. But if we wait until we feel very confident that we've really got this down, we're going to wait forever.
Yeah, and I think an effort that, or an action that a lot of people are starting to do is starting their own community fridge. With Veggie Me Has, the core of our activism is food justice and food accessibility. So I think one of the easiest things is, reaching out to community centers that are already in POC communities that are doing the work, and you could always offer, if their fridge is open and just stocking their fridge every week with plant-based foods, fresh produce. I feel like that's one of the easiest way to take part in mutual aid and really feed people and kind of slowly transition them into a plant-based diet. Our community fridge, we do our best to stock it with frozen vegan burritos and things that are at their convenience. But I think that's one of the easiest way to get involved in helping that way.
Great. These different initiatives and actions are really inspiring and accessible. So thank you. Just they seem like something we could really continue with. So thanks everyone for sharing that in the chat and verbally as well. Really appreciate that. And we commend all the good work that you're all doing within organizations, outside of organizations, both. We really, really appreciate that. Of course, to Pan as well. And so we wanted to actually share links if folks wish to, of course, totally optional, but if folks would wish to make a donation to any of the organizations involved tonight, we'll put some links in the chat shortly. Mindful of time, but any other questions coming up or anything that wants to, any folks want to share anything further? Thanks, Ellie, for the donation links. We definitely hope to continue these dialogues for sure and experiences. And we have some upcoming announcements from both PAN and PBS about some ongoing as well as upcoming initiatives. If any folks from PAN would like to share, that would be great.
Sure. Firstly, I just want to say thank you to everybody. It was a great conversation, and there was some super, super awesome, just thoughts and feelings, and some things that I wasn't expecting, and some things I was expecting. It was just all around really, really great, and I'm really happy with the way that it went, and I hope that everybody else enjoyed it as well. So thank you all for being here. Seriously, guests and panelists alike, and of course, Pittsburgh Vegan Society. PAN does have some upcoming events. So just a reminder, I had mentioned our 30-day vegan pledge. So if you are not yet vegan or you are vegan and you would like to mentor, our next programs coming up we have one that starts at the end of February, and then we have another one that starts mid-April, and you can sign up for both of those at our website to either mentor or pledge. We also have a chocolate cooking demo coming up right before Valentine's Day. So if you want to sign up to learn how to cook your own chocolate dessert, we have that. I think it's February 4th, and you can sign up. I can drop the link in the chat as well. The best thing to do is just follow us on social media. And then we're also going to have a screening of The Last Pig, which is a super, super awesome documentary. And there's going to be a Q&A with Allison Argo and Kathy Stevens after that. So if you're interested in seeing that documentary and joining the Q&A, those are some upcoming events that we have. And of course, you know, more that hasn't come yet and may be slotted in. So just give us a follow and we would love to see you at some upcoming events.
Great, thank you. Before we share some upcoming PBS events, anyone from any other organizations, including, of course, represented by the panelists tonight, FFAC, Encompass, Veggie Meat House, want to share any upcoming events, initiatives? And all of that sounds great at Pan, so thank you.
For FFAC, we are going to be starting our webinar series again. We're going to shift a little bit more to making more community events. So that's something that we obviously during COVID we had to really change our some of our programming, and so we started hosting similar to this, like what we're doing now, like our webinars, different topics related to animal advocacy. So these different issues. So definitely encourage people to check out our website and maybe sign up for our newsletter to learn more about that. Because if you enjoyed this, hopefully you will also enjoy the FFAC webinars and community events as well.
At Encompass, we have a global majority caucus for animal advocates of the global majority worldwide. And this year, last year we had a good number of events. This year we're continuing that. And we're encouraging everyone who's interested in connecting with other animal advocates, both domestically in the United States, but abroad, to do so. It's a great way to meet folks. We have a Slack channel where people share resources, ideas, frustrations, resources, and it's very interactive. We're going to be meeting once a quarter this year, and there's more information that I can share with folks if you reach out to me, and I can put my email in the chat. I'm not remembering right now how much we posted on the website about this already, but it's definitely open to any and all animal advocates of the global majority.
For Veggie Mijas, for the LA chapter, we recently just announced that we're going to continue on with our community fridge for the rest of the year. So a way that could really help us is just donating through our Venmo under Veggie Mijas. But you could also follow us on Instagram, where we share what each chapter is doing throughout the states. We have about 10 active chapters, and each one has their own special project, from community gardens to different virtual discussions on healing and wellness. So there's a lot going on, and there's probably something for everyone, since we're all all over the place in the States. But yeah, that's what's happening with Veggie Mijas.
Great, thanks everyone so much. Really great ongoing and upcoming initiatives and programs. And I'm really interested as well in the community fridge. That's awesome. Yeah, and Ellie, thank you for posting in the chat. For Pittsburgh Vegan Society, we have a number of upcoming programs as well. We're collaborating with FIPS, a local conservatory and botanical garden here in Pittsburgh, to do an online vegan focus series. So our first portion of that is coming up actually next week, next Wednesday at noon, Changing the Paradigm by Changing the Pantry, a focus on for folks maybe who are kind of earlier on or vegan curious or earlier in their vegan path, kind of a focus on food and kind of enhancing different vegan and plant-forward foods in their diet. And then the next month on February 25th, also at noon, all Eastern Standard Time, we're having a panel discussion focused on veganism, inclusive wellness, and social justice within BIPOC communities. So that's in about a month as well. And then in March, we are having a book discussion on March 20th, actually also Meat Out Day at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Veganism, a book edited by Julia Feliz, Veganism of Color, Decentering Whiteness, and Human and Non-Human Liberation. And then I'm going around a little bit in time, sorry, February 6th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, we're having a social connection time for anyone who wants to attend, all online as well. not like a set topic or topics, but anything anyone wishes to share about and connect about. So that's coming up as well. And all of our events are found on pavegan.org, our website. Thank you, Ellie, for maintaining it and designing it and all that good stuff. And Facebook, Instagram, we have all the social links as well. And just like tonight, our meetings are inclusive in every sense, including if folks are not vegan yet, if they're vegan curious, vegan adjacent, if they're just wanting to learn more, we are open and welcoming, as well as folks are respectful in every sense. I want to say thanks for adding on the chat too, in terms of any classes or organizations who would like a presentation. Yeah, totally. Thank you. Well, thank you everyone so much for the energy, for the attendance, for the great dialogue and inspiration. I really, really have appreciated tonight. In particular, thank you to Alejandra, to Jose, to Ms. Shell, to Vasily. Thank you. And thank you to Peace Advocacy Network for collaborating and making this happen tonight as well.